Hello, my name's Gav Cross. I'm a storyteller, and I like to read stories, supernatural stories. Tonight, I'm going to read from this, a century of creepy stories. Smells of age. This was published in 1934, apparently, so almost 2 centuries of creepy stories. I'm going to read a story by Hilda Hughes, who I have read before, called The Birthright. Now, this book has a very tiny little biography, and there isn't much about Hilda online. I do need to do some more digging. And it says, Hilda Hughes has been writing sensational stories ever since she was at Oxford. And the 2 reprinted here are fine examples of the skill with which she can interweave criminal and supernatural themes. So, from A Century of Creepy Stories by Hilda Hughes. The Birthright. Martin Drake was considered to be a clairvoyant from a little child. At the age of 10, he had dreamed of a drowning fatality in the brook on his uncle's farm, and the very next morning they'd found his grandfather laying face downwards in the ditch. His clothes were sodden with water. He was dead, as Martin had seen him in his dream. 2 years later, Martin, in the cold grey dawn in his waking hours, had seen as clearly as if it had happened before him the horse on which Lord Carney was riding stumble and fall, with its rider thrown under it. And when they picked him up, Lord Carney's neck was found to be broken. Martin's mother, susceptible to her boy's gifts, which were looked upon with disfavour by his father, who gave all his affection to his firstborn, Michael, took the vision as an evil omen. She had not been through the tragedy of her father's suicide for nothing. She rushed down to the manor, asked to see Lord Carney himself, and begged him not to ride to hounds that morning. He scoffed at the superstition of his servant's wife, who listened to the precocious prattlings of her younger boy, and rode to meet in the marketplace. 3 hours later, his horse fell clumsily and rolled over upon its master. They carried Lord Carney home upon a hurdle, Carney with his broken neck and his mouth gaping, and Martin had felt a strange thrill of pleasure when he had been told. It was as he had predicted. He became a person of some importance in the village after that. The schoolmaster, who dabbled in spiritualism, suggested that Martin was a mediumistic. The vision was, in his opinion, not due to the boy's clairvoyance, but to some spirit control. The child should be watched. Eminent research students who were investigating psychic phenomena should have an opportunity of talking with him. Mr. Drake, however, was indignant and refused to consider such an infamous piece of humbug. His wife's pleading left him adamant. The boy was a prig and should be thrashed until he dropped his posing. And when the old woman from the village tried to encourage Martin to have premonitions about themselves and their own concerns, Mr. Drake let it be understood that there was to be no more nonsensical talk of Martin, of what he ever did. Nothing he could do could please his father, but any suggestion of the boy's supernatural powers merely infuriated him. And so, during the next few years, Martin's clairvoyance, call it what you will, was discouraged, although his mother, convinced of her boy's uncanny powers, secretly regaled the ladies' sewing meeting with talk that brought a gleam to the eyes of the least susceptible and made the superstitious experience a curdling of the blood. When he was 24, Martin's father died. Mrs. Drake, a sensitive woman who had experienced a good deal of sorrow, lived in the old house because Michael had followed his father's footsteps and been made steward of the present Lord Carney's estate. A will, made several years before his death, left the entire estate to the elder son, since the widow had money of her own. In due course, the will was proved, and Mrs. Drake grieved secretly because the bitterness of her husband for a younger son had lived on in his heart throughout his life, and it had outlived his body. It was as if the father's will, bitter, it was as if the father's evil, bitter spirit toward her boy, their boy, brooded about the house, even stronger in death than it had been in life. Once, she spoke to Martin about it. "I couldn't understand your father as he got older," she said. "When I married him, I saw only the gentle side of his nature. He was loving and kind, but he faced all kinds of trouble, and he couldn't weather the storms. He was a bitter man, a cruel man. He did you a grievous wrong, my boy. He hated you in his lifetime, and his hate lives on. If he has any consciousness in that place where the dead go, he may come to be sorry. Perhaps it will trouble him. No, I can't rest at night in the room where we used to sleep. Perhaps you wouldn't mind changing bedrooms with me, my boy. It's silly, I know." "Your nerves are going to pieces, Mother," he said. "I'll change rooms with you." He did as she bade him, and he too had many sleepless nights. He gave them the shock of their lives at breakfast time on the anniversary of his father's death. "I couldn't sleep last night," he told them. "I know there was something strange about the place. I knew, too, what I should see. It was the old power working in me. I dreaded to see my father." His mother shuddered, her lips trembling, a strange sound whistling through her teeth. It was what she too had feared, but she dreaded still more that anyone should ever learn her secret, should know that her love for her man had slowly turned to hate and dread. She had trembled before him in his lifetime. She feared him still in death. It was terrible that, having hated him so much, she had been forced to give him her body. The horror of it had seared her mind. But what was her boy saying now? She looked at him, drawing his hand through his long, straight, brown hair. His face looked distorted as she watched him through the narrowing eyes. "I dreaded seeing him," Martin said in a strange, thick tones. "He hated me so I could feel his hate wrapping round me. The air seemed to be full of it. I couldn't breathe. I thought I should choke where I lay." "You must have had a nightmare," his brother interjected, but his mother hung upon every word, and then she turned her face aside and put her hand over her eyes so that they should not look into her soul. It was awful. It was like a poisoned gas in the air, physical as well as spiritual. If you see what I mean, I tried to sit up and then I fell back exhausted. I was sick to the heart and horribly afraid. And I can remember those trivial things which do stand out on days like this. I heard the cuckoo clock in the hall just as I heard it a few minutes before he died. I can remember noticing the awful ticking of my own watch, which lay on the dressing table beside me and ticked with a terrifying insistence, seeming to get louder and louder. I could hear the leaves tapping on the window and the head of Abraham Lincoln on the table looked strange in the moonlight. Even the knobs on the bedstead, with my dressing gown thrown over the rail, were unnerving. I shall never forget it. The insistence upon my consciousness of all these things, and yet I knew that something terrifying was going to happen, that I was a prisoner, numb with cold, yet suffocating. Slowly. "Go on!" his mother screamed, and they were both shocked by her voice, hollow and toneless. But Martin's voice was deep, and what he said seemed inevitable. People might cry, might batter themselves against fate. These things were true, unalterable. I noticed the thing near the window at first. Then it moved, sickeningly, toward the cupboard as though it could not see, but it must feel its way. And then it swung round and faced me. I saw my father's face, with hollows, where the eyes used to be, like a skull. A skull! Oh my God! The face was white, as he never was, even in death. I can't remember what clothes he had, if he had any, but he wrung his hands, and a terrible dry sobbing came from his lips. I tried to scream out. I couldn't make a sound. I sat up in bed, and I clutched the sheets, and slowly I could understand what he meant. It was a voice, all right, but the words were strange, like someone trying to speak who has been dumb for years. "Oh, God!" And he shot out one hand toward me. And although it didn't touch me, I had the sensation of something icy cold. "I have done you wrong, my boy," he said. "Look in my old open the family Bible. You will find it in Genesis." Then he turned aside and wailed, wrung his hands. I watched him as he went. He seemed to merge to the dust. He was like light, thin, white, transparent, but he seemed to fade away into the darkness, or else became lost in the moonbeam. I got out of bed when I could. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find him. I got back into bed, and cold sweat poured off of me. I don't wonder," said Michael, shocked to the depths, but trying to make a pretense of calm. "What do you think he meant?" cried the mother. Martin's long fingers played nervously with his lips. "How should I know? You see, he mentioned his old coat." He nodded. I wanted to give it to Johnson 2 days before he died," said the widow. "It was so shabby, but he would cling to it. There was a scene." "Where is it now?" asked Michael. "Couldn't you, with your powers, tell us that? Martin, oh boy." Mrs. Drake spoke quickly before her elder son could notice that his brother was not prepared to reply. "In the cupboard, with all these other old clothes. I left them untouched after he died." "He went towards the cupboard first," said Martin. They looked at each other significantly, as people do when they think they've found a clue. "We must go up at once." Michael took her arm. Martin followed them. They entered the bedroom where she had known so many unhappy nights. She knocked against the dressing table and bruised one hip in her hurry. Then she crossed to the built-in cupboard beside the fireplace and flung open the doors. Some old clothes of her own, 3 or 4 pairs of shoes, an old hat or two met her gaze. She took them out, threw them upon the floor, and took down her husband's frock coat, which had done duty at funerals, and though very old, was not to be despised even now. Then she produced a dressing gown, and lastly, from among a number of old garments, the coat in question. The outside pockets gave no clue. Then, as Michael, sitting on the floor, ran his fingers over it, he heard a crackling and felt something in the breast pocket. He took out a thin sheet of notepaper. Kneeling on the floor together among the debris of the wardrobe, they read it. I was unjust. I want to make amends before I die, and I have a premonition of death. For my last will and testament, look in the family Bible. Genesis. Just as he said, put in Martin. You didn't say anything about a will, said his brother. It didn't exactly mention the word. Thought I remember him saying, look in Genesis. Where is it, Mother? It's such a heavy book, said Mrs. Drake. We never use it now. It's got all your ages written upon the flyleaf. I remember your father, Cousin Jane, would do it. Silly old girl, said Michael. What does it matter? Sighed Martin. Mrs. Drake went carefully through a pile of books in the cupboard, but could find no trace of the family Bible. They found it. At last. In the bottom drawer of the chiffonier. In the dining room. Between the pages of Genesis, they found the will. It had been drawn up 3 years before and witnessed by Cousin Jane and Henry Dean. The premonition of death had evidently come to the strong man not a few days before he actually died. Not a few days before he actually died, as they had at first supposed, but during a severe attack of influenza 3 years earlier. I remember now. He was very nervous about himself, said the widow. Strong men always are when they are ill, said Martin. In the will, the property was to be divided equally between the 2 brothers. I'm glad your father didn't forget you after all, went on Mrs. Drake. But the will has already been proved, said Michael. The last will must stand, his mother interposed. You'll share and share alike now. It's only just. Your father regretted his bitterness. And to think, I never knew. Her eyes strayed to the printed page of the Bible. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. It was the poignant story of Jacob and Esau. A husband must have read that when he was ill. It had brought him to a new state of mind. The finding of the second will brought calm to Mary Drake's troubled spirit. Her boy, her baby, had not been forgotten. Perhaps her husband's heart had changed before he died. Perhaps he had become more like the man she had once loved passionately. Not the fiend she had known in later life. The proving of the second will took time. The technicalities of law always do, but the inheritance of the 2 brothers was shared equally at last. It was only Martin, benefiting by several thousands, who took it so calmly. His mother sometimes wondered if his father's change of spirit meant much to him. It was nice, of course, to have the money, but surely the justice of the thing must appeal to him. He must be sensitive. Was he not clairvoyant? Perhaps a medium. Martin and his brother talked for a long time about investments one night beside the fire in the old-fashioned dining room with its horsehair furniture and its copper kettles on the mantelpiece and its willow-pattern china upon the dresser and its sporting prints to decorate the walls. They had taken advice upon the subject that very afternoon and were viewing themselves with each other as men of property. With the money well invested, there was no knowing what they might do in the future. Neither of them had any responsibilities, any ties. Each had himself to consider, and money meant much to both of them, not merely because of the things it would bring them, but because it spelt power. When Martin went to bed that night in the old four-poster, which his mother and father had once used, he went to sleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. It was a large room with low beams and only one door. Rain fell outside and leaves rattled against the window pane. But they had no power to disturb Martin. He had his fortune. He had power. His dreams as the night passed were fantastic. He could see himself as master of the hunt, living in the fine old manor. He could see more money coming from his mother later, and a wife, and children sitting beside him at a table spread with silver and crystal. Yet he had never really loved in his life. But the woman in the dream was beautiful, and she was looking across the table with a smile. He could see himself lifting his glass and draining it. It was a funny thing to experience, the sensation of good old wine in a dream. He could feel it, nice to his palate, soothing to his stomach. His legs were tingling. He saw himself stand up and propose a toast. Then the scene changed. They were all at the hunt ball, he and his friends, and they were drinking at the bar, and then later dancing madly in a gallop. There seemed to be a fever in his blood. He danced the gallop, which had returned to fashion in order to round off a hunt ball programme, as he had never danced it before. A girl was looking up into his eyes. He bent over, wanted to snatch a kiss. Then he awoke. There was something in the room. He could not see it, but he could feel. It was not the blind either, which was flapping at the open window, nor the curtain, which was blown about and then seemed to bulge into the room. And how the wind howled. It was on him before he knew. He could feel something scorching him. Or was it his breath, or the heat from the wood fire crackling in the grate? Tried to get up to escape, but small greenish eyes looked into his. His father stood over him, brooding over him, with intense hate and loathing on his face. And in his eyes, there were no hollows as in a skull. It was the face of a madman who acted with disconcerting logicality. The thing was trying to speak now. What was that nonsense you told them? The face of a skull? The voice made him cower in his bed. You lied! You never saw me! I did not come! Martin put his hand before his eyes to shut out the sight. The feeling of heat was terrible. You lied! You lied! The voice screamed out the truth in a crescendo. Sweat poured off Martin's face. His tongue was cloven. He lay trembling as if in an ague. Words failed. Screams would not come. Yet every nerve in his body cried aloud in pain, in horror for the peril that was to come. And the thing was drawing nearer, leaning over the bed. You forged by name, and the witness's name upon that false will, who wrote letters in my handwriting about my premonitions, never so much as thought of death in all my life. Would to God I had! You, a forger! The voice died away and then rose again in a scream. His father's great red hands, with sandy hairs upon them, reached out towards his throat. Martin made a last effort to cry out, and then the thing was upon him. His blood-curdling scream was his swan song. His brother and a fireman forced their way into the room. The smoke was thick, but the fire had not done much damage. Martin, however, lay white and still upon the bed. They lifted him before they realized the doctor came. It was not the fire that killed him, he said. Didn't even touch him. But these things are easily explained. Death was undoubtedly due to shock. The Birthright by Hilda Hughes. Read by me, Gav Cross. From this. A century of creepy stories. Read live on Substack. And then here. YouTube. Or a podcast. You should come along and read it. Listen live. It's much more fun. In fact, things are coming. Things are rising from the dark. The Haunted Book Club. Collaboration with myself and John Reppion, author, comic book writer, expert on the unearthly, on the folkloric, on the Lovecraftian, and a good friend, someone I've drunk a lot of beer with. So, a Haunted Book Club will take place on Spotify. It will also be available afterwards on YouTube and as an audio podcast in the usual places. We have picked some stories, and it starts with the Signalman. We thought we'd go with a classic. We've picked the first few, but what we would really like is for you to come along live. Having read or listened to the story, I will read it to you in a separate feed. And then there will be a book club. John will bring his expertise. I will ask the stupid questions, and then we want to know what you think. And then we want you to choose the stories, the classic Victorian, the Edwardian, the quiet, dark stories that hide in ancient collections. Haunted Book Club. I will read you the story. We will have a live book club on Substack Tuesdays at 8:30. And then they will be available as a podcast in all those places. Come along. Join in. Turn the light off. Light a candle. Take care. Let me know what you think. And please, it really would help us if you did like and subscribe ahead. We start very, very soon. I'm going now. One day, I shall write a will. I didn't do that.